Wadsworth Constant states that the first 30% of any video on the internet is absolutely useless and can be skipped over. So let's break with that. And did you know that Lego people's hands fit your phone cables perfectly and can be used as cable management? There, see, now anybody who skipped through the first few minutes of this video will have missed out on that very important piece of information and will lead a pretty sad and miserable life. Or they don't have any Lego, which will result in the same thing. But let's get to why we're really here. A couple of years ago, a student teacher came up to me and asked me, how do you plan and differentiate for the Aboriginal learners in your class? And very much to my embarrassment, I didn't have an answer. Not because I don't differentiate, not because I don't plan for students' strengths and weaknesses, but because I didn't even know if I had any Aboriginal learners in my classroom. Status or not, self-identified or not, I really didn't know if I had any. And that sent me down a pretty deep shame spiral, or what I like to call a rabbit hole. And over the last few months, I've been delving deep into that rabbit hole and discovering some things, and something cool came out of that. I discovered that there's a couple approaches to innovative curriculum planning that complement and mirror each other really nicely. And that these two approaches, when put together, can be a great way of learning our not only Indigenous learners, but students across the board. The two programs that I'm mashing up, that I'm combining, that complement each other really well, are design thinking and the 8 ways of Aboriginal learning. And as I said, while I started with a focus on Aboriginal learning, it really does apply to all learners. So let's start with design thinking and what it is. I'm going to throw up a graphic on there, right on the screen for you, and you're going to see what design thinking is, and I'll take you through it. Here's a very quick thumbnail sketch of what it is. In design thinking, people are solving real-life problems using inexpensive materials to create prototypes. We throw students into a loop of 5 stages, well, 4 to 6, depending on whom you ask. And as they're going through those stages, not only are they solving the problem using those inexpensive materials, but they are also building core competencies. They're learning how to collaborate. They're learning how to ask questions. They're learning how to look at things from a different perspective. So, what are the 5 stages? Let's look at empathy first. And I use the word first with some hesitance. This is a natural starting place for some people, but you don't have to start here. Design thinking is quite nonlinear. You can go anywhere, but for most people, this is a natural step. So let's start with empathy. And what is it? You're learning how to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else, in the shoes of your client. You have to look at things from their perspective. If you're trying to solve problems from your perspective only, then you've essentially become a politician, and nobody wants that. Insert cue laughter. All right. But in that empathy phase, we have to look at the problem. And we say, for example, you know what? 40% of the students in our school are coming every day late by 10 to 20 minutes. Whoa, that's terrible. When we have that problem, we have to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. Now, that could be the students that are always coming in late. What's happening in their life that is making them late? What routines and procedures are affecting them, and what's causing them to be late? Or we can put ourselves in the shoes of the parents. What's going on in their life that is leading them to have their kids come to school late? Or we put ourselves in the shoes of the administration. Regardless, the empathy phase is a very challenging one. It's something that you think, oh yeah, I can just think about how they would look at it. In the class that I taught last year, this was something that took the kids months to really start to get a handle on. Next, we have define. This is a funny step because you're both broadening and expanding the problem. First of all, you have to expand the problem into a positive frame. What I mean by that is if your problem is, our students are always late, and that's all you do. You just stand up and say, our students are always late. Our students are always failing the PAT exams. And all you've managed to do is whine and complain, then you're not going to solve a problem. Let's rephrase it in the positive. How can we support our students to get them to school on time? What can we put in place for our parents to help them get their kids to school on time? What can we as an administrative team do to encourage students or reinforce the idea that coming to school on time is important? we redefine the problem in a positive way. But we can also narrow the problem. Perhaps maybe it's only happening in the winter time. Maybe in the summer it's not an issue. Or it happens in the fall and it happens at the end of the school year. So by looking at where the problem is happening, by narrowing the problem, we're much better suited to creating a solution without any redundancies. The third stage is ideate. It is throwing any idea on the table that can possibly solve this problem depending on how we defined it. Maybe we need to start school 20 minutes later or 20 minutes earlier. Maybe we need to build bridges across intersections so students aren't waiting for lights. Maybe we give each kid their own Uber, and that way they don't have anyone to blame but themselves. Or better yet, hover boots, right? I mean, like, wouldn't you get to school faster on time if you had hover boots? Of course you would. Think of any ideas, throw them out on the table, don't leave anything off, because if you do, you might miss out on a really innovative idea like the iPhone used to be. Then we prototype. We use those inexpensive materials, those easy to access tools and resources to build something to shape our idea. It could be with cardboard and Kleenex boxes, or it could be a pencil and paper or poster that we make, or it could be something that we've built on a free computer program like Scratch. But the cool thing here is during the prototype phase is that it's inexpensive. It doesn't cost you much of anything, whether it's emotional investment or whether it's financial investment. And that makes the idea much easier to discard and throw out. You're not going to be offended if someone comes up to you and says, you know what, the idea here, the prototype, it's whimsical, but it's not going to really address our needs. You don't have to break down and cry and go, what have I done with my life? Once you've had your prototype ready, whatever it happens to be, a poster, a plan, a chomper or a cardboard set of hover boots, you test it. You present it to your client, you show it to a professor, you show it to the other people in your classroom, and you have them give you feedback. Oh, you know what, this works really well here. Or you put those little hover boots on your little sister and see, you know what, they fit really nicely. They're even lifting her off the ground, but they're really uncomfortable. Whatever it happens to be, you get feedback and you take that prototype and you make it better, and you are not done. You go back because somebody might have given you an idea that says, you know what, the idea is really good, but the prototype isn't quite working. Or I have an idea, like I love your hover boots idea, let's combine it with my idea, and before you know it, you have a real feasible solution. So that's design thinking in a nutshell. If you haven't used design thinking yet, or haven't really done much with it, I strongly encourage you to try it. It's a great way to approach curriculum planning in an innovative way. Before I get to the 8 ways of Aboriginal learning, I just want to quickly mention 3 really strong benefits of why this mashup is a great way of reaching our Aboriginal students and students across the board, really. First of all, it jumps over one of those major hurdles, cost. It is not expensive to implement a program, a course, or a class like this. It doesn't take a lot of money to get it started, which is often one of those biggest obstacles. You can get parents to donate tools, or you can get people bring in their recycling instead of going to the garbage dump, or you can go to a big box store and say, hey, do you guys got any cardboard that I could use? You'll get a lot, trust me. It doesn't cost a lot. And a bank of iPads or a computer card is really nice and it's handy, but it's not necessary for design thinking. Second, and this is my favorite, is that there's constant and immediate feedback all the time. We are eschewing that traditional model of study, 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 test, study, 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 test, study, study, test, flush. With design thinking, you are constantly getting feedback. Whether you are trying to figure out how to glue 2 pieces of cardboard together, or whether you're trying to figure out how to draw your schematic that it's easy for somebody else to read, or whether you're presenting your hover boots to someone, you're always getting feedback and you're learning, how do I make it better? How do I not take it personally? How do I improve this idea or amalgamate these concepts? You're always getting feedback and you're learning. And finally, design thinking and the 8 ways of Aboriginal learning are really in their wheelhouse when they're tackling local problems. I mean, they can be used to solve things that are happening halfway across the world, but I guarantee you, you are going to get way more engaged. Your students are going to get way more engaged. I get way more engaged when I'm trying to solve a problem that is affecting me directly. For example, I have skunks in my backyard. I'm going to try way harder to figure out how to solve that problem than which daimyo, what was the succession of daimyos in feudal Japan in the 1700s. So, what are the 8 ways of Aboriginal learning? Through the magic of post-production, I'm going to throw this image up here. There we go. Isn't that beautiful? It comes to us from Australia and the work of Yanka Porta. And as you are looking at this image, I'm going to go through each of these 8 components of the 8 ways of Aboriginal learning, and I'll talk about how they complement and mirror each other in design thinking. First, community links. In Aboriginal learning, the links to the community are paramount. The importance of a community's values, their rituals, their routines, their procedures, their way of life, their habits of mind, and the way that where the community came from, what their ancestors did, what their people have done and tried before in the past, and what will the decisions that they have made, how will those decisions affect further generations? In design thinking, it is the same thing. We always have to consider the client's values. We have to consider their morals. What is it that they want? What is it that they need? We also have to consider, where have they come from? What have they tried before in the past? And how will the prototype or the solution that we're offering affect them now and in the future? We also have deconstruct and reconstruct. This is one of my favorites. How do I explain it? Here's the best way. You can't see the forest for the trees, and you can't see the trees for the forest, or however that saying goes. In both models, you're always going between the micro and the macro. You have to be constantly cognizant of how the little minutia affects the big picture. You can't build a house without knowing what is that end goal. And you can't build a house without knowing how to put a nail, drive a nail into a piece of wood with a hammer. And as teachers, we need to take students and show them how to do that, how to go back and forth between the two, so they don't get lost in figuring out how to put 2 pieces of cardboard together and realizing that now that they've done this, they've completely lost sight and track of what it is that they were doing in the first place. And we can't have them being so focused on the big picture that we forget that maybe there are certain impractical applications to what we're doing. We're always going back and forth between the means and the end, the means and the end. Both systems are nonlinear. There is no start point and there is no set end goal. You see in the image again right here up in front of you, and for those people, wonderful people in front of me that are filming, they don't see it, but I do. It's miraculous. You will see how there is no A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can start at any point, you can end at any point, and look at the lines and how they connect and how they feed each other. In design thinking, it is the same thing. You can't master one without mastering all, really. You don't really have an understanding unless you understand all of them. You can start at the prototype phase. Last year, I was teaching a design thinking course, and I had a student start at the prototype phase. I had some students start at the empathy phase. There is no set end point or starting point. Land links. It should come as no surprise that Aboriginal peoples have a very strong connection to the land, and it is no different with design thinking. We have to consider, how are we using our resources respectfully? Are we being good stewards of the environment? What effects will the prototypes or the ideas that we're introducing, what effects will they have on the environment and the peoples and the communities around them? Symbols and images. I do not need to tell you the power of a red octagon or a biohazard symbol. They speak volumes. You don't need to read a whole ton to know when there's danger or when something is inviting you in. In design thinking, we use the same thing. We use symbols and images, whether the way we draw images onto our schematics to convey meaning. A simple symbol or a simple image goes a long way. Just like the petroglyphs on the inside of a cave wall can tell a really amazing story without a word being written or read. Both are also nonverbal to some degree. There's power in watching someone use a tool and learning by observing. And there's power to being able to step back and watch and see how people function, how people interconnect, or what patterns emerge, not only in nature, but in people. What happens every 10 minutes? What happens every 10 days? What happens every few months? There's a huge component of nonverbal learning. Learning maps. This is probably one of my favorite components, and this gives us a glimpse of formative assessment. Everybody's learning map is going to be different. For example, some people will start here and then they'll move on to here and then they'll go on to there and then they make a quick little jump here and they make a quick little jump and then they're done. But for most people, our learning maps are different. The learning map for you in school was very different from mine. As I said, I taught the design thinking course last year, and I had one student start at the quote-unquote fourth step. I just had him building prototypes, just getting him making stuff, gluing pieces of tape together, pieces of cardboard together, just making stuff because I needed to keep him in school. I needed to keep him in class. And his learning map circled around that prototype phase for a long time before it jumped back to that empathy phase. I had some students really work at the define section and then move on to the testing section because they couldn't really quite put things together yet. They couldn't quite put the prototypes together yet, but they had an idea and they had to talk about it through. Each person's learning map is going to be different. Our job as educators is to not only help our students write those maps, but is to teach them how to draw their own learning maps. Finally, we have storytelling. For Aboriginal peoples, when we think of Aboriginal peoples, storytelling is one of those really powerful images that come up. The idea of origin myths, the idea of lots of information being transmitted through stories over tens of thousands of years. In design thinking, it's no different. We are always focused on the narrative. What happens? Who are the characters? Who are our clients? What are the problems? What are the obstacles? What are the complications? What happens before the story? What brought us to this place? What happens at the end of the story? We know there's no such thing as happily ever after. The story continues. How will the decisions that we've made in our narrative affect the epilogue? So there you have it. The 8 ways of Aboriginal learning and design thinking. I hope that you see how they complement each other really nicely, and I hope that this has inspired you to maybe dig a little deeper and try it. At the end of the video, there's going to be some links that you can use to learn a little bit more. And if you try it, there's a couple of things that I think you're going to discover. One is that it's responsive. It's responsive to the needs of your students, it's responsive to the needs of your school, and it's responsive to the needs of your community. Second, both models do a wonderful job of fostering and nurturing connections. Connections between the student and the teacher and the school and the community and the student and the curriculum and the community. There are so many connections to be made when you're approaching curriculum design through something like this. And finally, it's new, it's different. If you've been at this for 20 years and you're just starting to get bored, or the little Johnnies in your class are starting to drive you insane, this might be something new to try. Don't rest on your laurels. Just because you've done something a certain way for the last 10 years doesn't mean it's okay to keep doing it the way you've been doing it. If that were the case in other professions, doctors would still be throwing leeches at our imbalanced humors in hospitals. We don't want that. Push your practice forward. Try something different. I hope you've had a wonderful time. I hope you learned something different. I'm going to be here all week. Thank you. Good night. Don't forget to tip the waitresses. You're beautiful people. Good night.
I'd like you to stand up. And honestly, there's nothing more I can say.